The Arab world, as you all know, is going perhaps through one of its most transformative periods since the establishment of nation states at the end of World War I. In no small part, this transformation is caused by the violent conflicts that have erupted across the region, particularly post-2011, the post-Arab uprisings that began in December 2010 in Tunisia and went on. This particular moment of hope and the pushback that it endured by governments that were seeking to hold on to power. Okay. Today, we have at least 8 Arab states that are witnessing one form of conflict or the other. Citizens of Arab countries make up 5% of the world's population, just a few figures to give things and put things in perspective. And yet they account for more than 50% of the global refugee population. There are 147 million Arabs in countries experiencing war or occupation. And 17 million people have been displaced, forcibly displaced and uprooted from their homes. Just to give further figures, 5 million of those are Palestinians who've been uprooted for the past 50 and 70 years. Today, as of February 2017, 4.9 million Syrian refugees and 6.3 million IDPs within Syria. In Iraq, there are 3.1 million people who have been displaced. A fraction of those were displaced after the Second Gulf War in 2003 and then the Civil War in 2006 and 2007. But the majority were displaced when ISIS took over, the so-called Islamic State took over large parts of Iraq. And now there's been additional displacement with the offensive to retake parts of Iraq by the government. Forgive me if I'm getting a bit too much detail, but in Libya, there are about 500,000 people of concern. In Yemen, a place that we rarely talk about, there are 3.1 million people who have been displaced, and we'll see some of the figures shortly. Sudan, another 3.1 million IDPs. What this means effectively for the region is, yes, there's widespread vulnerability. Just the sheer number of people who are today living below the poverty line is mind-boggling. Looking at Syria, for example, 80% of the population of Syria that still is within Syria is now living below the poverty line. 71% of those who took refuge in Lebanon are living below the poverty line, and 2/3 of those who took refuge in Jordan are also living below the poverty line. There is also food insecurity, and I'm just using those 2 indicators, but there are many more. 17.1 million Yemenis are food insecure. 7 million of them are severely food insecure. And there was an increase of 3 million in just 7 months. We're talking about Yemen, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. In Iraq also, there are about 4 million people who need assistance. In addition to this, in 2016, 1 million Syrians lived under siege in different parts of Syria. Some of these sieges have been lifted, but many still continue. The majority of those sieges were by the government of Syria itself and its allied forces, 85%, and the rest were a mixture of government, ISIS, and other armed groups. The problem with the sieges is also that they have been used as part of the bargaining chips between government militias, between the government forces and the rebel forces. In ceasefires, in negotiations, for example, when the government took over the eastern parts of Aleppo this summer, the ceasefire that was announced was halted the day that it was supposed to be implemented, because the government came back and said, no, in exchange for lifting the siege on Aleppo and allowing civilians to leave, we want you to lift the siege on 2 other villages that the rebels were controlling. So the idea that populations have become bargaining chips in a vicious proxy and civil conflict in Syria is going to have long-lasting repercussions. Now, this has also had a ripple effect on surrounding countries and on host countries. To just give a sense, in Lebanon, there are 1 million Syrian refugees approximately in a country of 4.2 million. The total population of the country is 4.2 million. So 1 in 5 people in Lebanon is a refugee, is a Syrian refugee. While the arrival of refugees is not itself the cause of problems, but they have exacerbated the presence of an additional 1 million people in the country has exacerbated pre-existing structural challenges that the country was already facing in infrastructure and other areas, economic growth, employment, and so on and so forth. The World Bank estimates that 200,000 additional Lebanese have fallen below the poverty line, and that 1/3 of Lebanese youth have become unemployed, a 50% increase since 2011. Unemployments in Jordan have also increased to 21%, and then the same in the Kurdistan region. In Iraq, and I'm using again random figures from different places just to give a taste of what the crisis has meant for countries that are hosting the refugees. In Jordan, there are about 700,000 refugees by UN figures. In Kurdistan, the refugee inflow is not just Syrian, but also people who have been displaced by the atrocities of ISIS, Yazidis who were hunted down and killed, Christians who were hunted down and expelled, Turkmens, and so on and so forth. What we're also witnessing today is what many people have called the lost generation. There are huge numbers of children who are out of school. For example, 2.8 million UNICEF estimates of Syrian children are out of school. And 50% of those in primary school education are actually in school in a place like Lebanon. The concern also is not to go a bit beyond the figures, but actually to look at what these children are learning. In a place like Lebanon that has taken in 200,000 of 400,000 primary school, primary age children, we are not sure about what quality of education they're getting in school and what happens when they get out of school. They live in a situation where, in a context where they're not allowed to work. The government of Lebanon's policies towards refugees has been ad hoc at best, but one defining element has been they've looked at refugees from a security perspective. If you travel around the country, you will see a lot of banners where that municipalities have put up, creating there's a curfew on refugees moving around in cities and towns after 7 p.m., 8 p.m. They're lovely banners. They call on their brothers and sisters of the Syrian community to simply not leave their homes after a certain hour. So the idea that they are living in a very incredibly strenuous context, and yet they see no options for the future. What is also of concern are children who are above age 12, between 12 and 18 or 12 and 25. These are the kids who are not going to school. These are kids who are many of them are severely traumatized. They're incredibly vulnerable. They've witnessed things that no child should ever see. And yet, again, they are not in schools. They have nothing to fill their days, and they have very little hope in terms of what it is they can do with their future. The quote I sort of put up here was captured by a journalist who was interviewing some children in the Zatari camp in Jordan. And I can speak a little bit about the conditions in Jordan and in Lebanon later in the question and answer period. But when she asked him, "What is your dream?" and his response was, "I think we will not get freedom. Bashar will win," i.e. Bashar al-Assad. he continued, my dream is that we will win, but my second dream is that when I turn 16 or 18, I will go to Syria and join the jihad. For him, joining the jihad is simply about fighting back against a government that has stripped him of everything, that has barrel-bombed his own population, and that has stripped him of so much. But just so as not to be very morbid, this is an image of some of those children in a camp that takes place every summer. I mean, civil society has been incredibly active over the past few years in terms of helping support with informal education. I mean, there are large, incredible stories happening on the ground of people who have really stepped up to try and fill the void that is left by governments, or in places where the UN has not been able to do as much as it can because of lack of funding or other resources. This was a camp last summer where children were being taught throughout the day basic skills such as how to write in Arabic and English. And the joy these children took in this education was just remarkable. At the end of the summer, I was asking one of them what she felt, and she said, I don't know what to do with my days now. This was an 8-year-old. I have to go back home, and I have nothing to go back home to. This is happening, sorry, this is a bit early. This is happening in a context where there is a militarization of society. If we look at a place like Iraq or Syria, for example, there's a plethora of paramilitary groups that have emerged across both countries. I'll take Iraq as one example. There are about 50 to 60 groups operating under something called the Hashd al-Shabi, which is a paramilitary group affiliated with the government, with government forces. The problem with this group is that while they operate under one umbrella, each of those groups sort of follows a different political leader. What's even more problematic is many of them have been constituted on ethnic and sectarian lines. The challenge is that for many communities, and I'll take the Yazidi community that I've been doing some research with recently, many of the Yazidis have refused to go back home, even from areas that have been recaptured from ISIS, that are now under government control, because they do not trust that the government will protect them. They do not trust that if they go home, they will be safe. So they've preferred to stay in the miserable camp where at least they feel that they are protected in number and that ISIS cannot come anywhere near them. They also are very worried because many of them believe that it was their neighbors that attacked them. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done in a context where there is this level of militarization. There's a lot of concern that in the post-ISIS, for example, Iraq, the problems will not be between the big sectarian blocs, between the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Kurds, but they will actually be within each group. Today you have different paramilitary groups that are Yazidis, different paramilitary groups that are Turkmen. I mean, within the same ethnic group, you'll have multiple groups. So there's a lot of concern that this could devolve even further. In Syria, what is also disconcerting, what I mentioned earlier, which is that population transfers on the basis of ethnic and sectarian identity is also taking place as part of local ceasefires in Syria. This is incredibly dangerous and sets up it's planting the seed for continued social strife down the road. I think that at least at the global level, there definitely was a failure in the responsibility to protect citizens who were being attacked in multiple levels. The countries in the region definitely do not have the capacity to address the fallout of the crisis. I mean, Syria is the epicenter of the refugee crisis today, globally, unfortunately. Even countries in the region are themselves involved in some of the proxy wars taking part in Syria today. More critically, I think there's also a collective responsibility to address the fallout of the conflicts, not only on moral grounds, but also as a question of common interest. And I believe Kelly will be talking probably about this in much more detail tomorrow. In today's world, the fallout from this crisis, this spread, this increase in vulnerability, in poverty, the militarization of society, the kind of trauma and injury that has befallen entire societies is not one that will remain restricted to a region or to a geography. The anger and increasing sense of marginalization across the region is quite palpable and will only increase as the assault on the liberal order and values of open borders and open societies increases, continues. With the current administration, but with as we heard a little earlier, also in different parts in Europe. For people in the region, authoritarianism is really the biggest challenge. They want what everybody else wants. And it's ironic that this kind of shutdown is happening in the US and in other places at a time when people in the region rose to say, we want our freedom, we want democracy, and we want policy. At Carnegie, we did a very sort of a survey with about 110 experts, policymakers, civil society activists from across the region, different gender, political backgrounds, religious backgrounds, I mean, you name it. And one of the questions we asked, how do you rank? What are the most serious issues that the region is facing? And the number one issue that everybody pointed to was the question of governance, and then number two was the question of corruption. Whoops, sorry, here it is. It was authoritarianism and then corruption. Now, oops. The post-conflict settlements, the post-conflict challenges, I mean, where do we go next after all of this? There is a traumatized population. There's a loss of social cohesion in the region. There's an increase in the number of female-headed households. And maybe I should just mention a silver lining in some of this. And this is not particular to Syria, but women have become empowered in exile. I've been speaking to quite a few female refugees, and the story we keep hearing is now the men have to follow us because we're the ones who are working, and the men are having to sit at home. So it's the only silver lining I could find. I mean, one young lady was recounting to me how her father, who's a general in the army, and was a general in the Syrian army, and defected when the uprising started. They now live in Jordan, and after a lot of back and forth, he eventually had to give in and allow his daughter to work. And she was talking to me about the complete transformation in dynamics within the household, where now she's the one earning money and he's sitting at home doing nothing. And it's earned her a lot of respect in the eyes of her father, but also in the eyes of her brothers and sort of the surrounding environment. I think first and foremost, if we want to talk about where do we want to go next, there is a need for a just political settlement. There's a lot of discussion of a political settlement in Syria. Most recently, Staffan de Mistura, the special envoy, has been talking about a political settlement, and they're no longer talking about a political transition. There's a lot of concern with this amongst Syrian refugee communities. We're doing a project right now where we're working with Syrian refugees to find out and to talk to them about the triggers of return. What would they want to see, and how do they think about when they talk about returning to Syria. And a lot of what they're concerned about, I mean, the need for just political settlement is that international experience shows that if there isn't, I mean, if communities are not involved in this settlement, the war will erupt again, basically, in short. What do refugees effectively want? One of the things that they want, I mean, we always have a bias for repatriation, and we focus a lot of our work on repatriation. And 9 times out of 10, the refugees do want to go back home. Most of the Syrian refugees we've been talking to want to go back home, but they will only consider going back home under very special circumstances. The first thing they demand is security. They want to know that if they go back home, they will be secure, their children will be secure, their families will be secure. However, they don't trust the government, even when they are pro-regime. They do not trust the government, nor any of the opposition forces to provide that security. There's a complete loss of confidence in the law and in the current system within the country. So the only thing they've come up with is we need international guarantees, and international guarantees in the form of boots on the ground. They want to see people, actually physically people there, guaranteeing their safety in Syria. Excuse me. They want an end to conscription. One of the big challenges in Syria again, and I should say this project is with mainly Syrian refugees, is that a lot of young men have had to flee Syria because the age of conscription was raised to age 50. So that's how desperate the regime has become to recruit people, unfortunately. So a lot of young men who do not want to take part in the conflict, who see no reason why they should be killing each other, have had to flee. A lot of families have fled because they have young boys who would be conscripted if they stayed. So that's another thing that people are very keen on. They want to see an end to conscription into the army. They're all seeking a transitional government. Repeatedly, whether it's in Jordan or in Lebanon, where we've had these discussions so far, the focus always is on a transitional government. Whether they're pro-regime or pro-rebels, and the level of openness about this varies from context to context. They want to see a transitional government system. They're very worried about the level of sectarian discord in the country. They're very worried about the level of international interference in their country, and here it's a bit of a conundrum because they don't want the current actors who are in, i.e. they don't want the Russians, they don't want the Iranians, they don't want the Saudis, but they want to see an international force that they can trust, that can sort of guarantee whatever peace agreement is reached. They also want to see a form of justice. When we ask them, and this is one of the things we talk to them about, the potential for amnesty. Would you be willing to go back if there is complete amnesty and absolute amnesty? And resoundingly, consistently, it's no. We cannot live with people who we can understand that there could be amnesty for some, but we have to be very careful about what kind of amnesty there is. People who have committed atrocities will commit them again and again if there isn't some sort of a transitional justice mechanism in place. They're not seeking vengeance, but they're worried. They're worried about the future of their families. Surprisingly, last on their list is livelihoods. I mean, of course, education and health they want to see, especially those who have children. They want to know that their children will be getting education. But repeatedly, they would go back and say, I will go back to Syria and I can find work. I'm not worried about this. I want to see everything else there first before I will consider going back to Syria. So I think there is a need for some creative thinking, and many in this room have already been doing this in terms of how to address this fallout. How does one rethink the responsibility to protect? How do we go beyond humanitarian support to support these refugees in building their lives in a situation where, at least to my mind, based on everything we've seen so far, people are not going to be going back anytime soon. How do we involve communities in this process? And perhaps this is the most fundamental issue, is really how do we involve these communities that everybody is talking on their behalf, but nobody's actually talking to them to see what it is that they need and what they want. There is definitely a collective responsibility to deal with this crisis. I wanted to just end this to remind everybody why this uprising started in Syria in particular. This was when Robin Williams, this is a town called Farnabal. They became very famous in the last 6 years for their fantastic banners and posters. I have plenty more I can show you in the break. But this one was about freedom. That sort of captured for them, it's a quote from Robin Williams, to be free, such a thing would be greater than all the magic and all the treasures in all the world. This is what they were looking for. This is what they are still looking for. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you.